everyone, and welcome to the third module of the research training course. This research training course is an initiative from the E1 Health Cluster in the Eastern Province. And it is with great pleasure to introduce Dr. Al-Anoud Al-Shami, pediatric transplant, and also the Director of Epidemiology and Biostatistics Department in King Fahd Specialist Hospital. Welcome, Dr. Al-Anoud. The mic is yours.
All right, thank you very much, هديل. السلام عليكم، مساء الخير، كل عام وانتم بخير جميعا بمناسبة رمضان وبمناسبة العيد، كل عام وانتم بخير مقدما. في البداية I'd like to thank the organizing committee for giving me this great opportunity to present today. So, inshallah, in the coming 40 minutes, I'll be talking about a very important topic in research, which is tips for writing a good research proposal. So, before I start, I thought that I need to discuss this a little bit, and I ask myself, I always do ask myself, what does it take to become a good researcher? Is it a research degree? And I don't think. I think it's way more than this. And same concept applied to physician or to any healthcare worker in any profession. Degree is not the only thing that makes you excel in your career. So degree in research qualification, I don't think it's the only reason. It's way beyond this. So there are certain traits and characteristics a good researcher should have. So the first thing, a good researcher should be open-minded to all different ideas, whether regardless these ideas are coming from whom, and whether these ideas are in line to his ideas. As long as these ideas are testable, as long as these ideas are falsifiable. The second important trait or characteristics is to be a good observer. And I'd like to take the opportunity and to advise all trainees, whether resident, fellows, to take the opportunity of their clinical practice and clinical work. And I'm sure they always ask, I want to do research, but I'm not sure which topic or area of research should I talk about, what research questions should I have. So I always say the clinical practice is a big area for observation. Look at how your consultants are treating patients, or how different approach they have. Look at their practice variation, and always ask yourself, is there a justifiable cause of this practice variation? And most of the time, practice variation has no clear evidence, and it's a good opportunity to look for and search for the gaps in knowledge because of practice variation. Third, critical thinker and skeptical. These are very important, especially skepticism. In order to be a good researcher, and especially in EBM, and when you critique article, you need to be very skeptical in order to be able to critique articles. Of course, you need to be inquire, and always the motive of research should be out of curiosity and inquiry. You always try your best to have and find a certain area of research interest, rather than searching in everything. Always expertise and good and robust research comes from researchers who are really interested in focus, and they have depth in knowledge. When you're focused, for sure, you are mastering this area and you have depth in knowledge. Last but not the least, you need to be committed. And research is really labor intensive. You need to be patient and committed because it takes time. And of course, in order to be committed, you need to be passionate about what you're doing. Key points before I start. Scientific research has become a necessity, and it's not luxury anymore. There is no current organization or health institution that can grow or develop without using research. And this statement actually caught my attention. It was in the British Medical Journal published in 2008. And this is a strong message for residents and trainees. A 21st century clinician who cannot critically read a study is as unprepared as one who cannot take blood pressure or examine the cardiovascular system. And I feel this example is a real example at this century. Research is very important. Learning the skills of critical appraisal is also is a mandate. And people might think, and I think everybody has passed through this, myself, I do, a lot of time up until now, we feel that at every stage of our academic career, there are times we need guidance. We need guidance and support in order to initiate writing, sustain momentum, improve efficiency. So at all stages of your career, don't ever hesitate to ask for help, ask for mentor, ask for guidance in research. Research is learned by conducting research, not by courses, not courses and degrees for sure will help, that you will not learn exactly what's research about unless you do research. And the first time you do it and you succeed will boost your confidence and you will be excited, more passionate about the second and third and fourth manuscript writing and publication. Do not please do research for sake of research. Do it because you're passionate, do it because your goal is to make an impact on your field, impact on global health, on policy makers. Make it because you want to make a change, not just because you're pressurized to get promoted, or I know it's important, but you will not generate a robust and special research unless you're passionate about what you're doing. So let's go, or before, and again, a lot of time, it's normal to have negative feelings attributed to writing. So this was proven even by studies in literature. You can, especially when you start writing a proposal or when you start writing the manuscript, and this is normal. You can have avoidance feeling. You can enter a state of procrastination, disappointment, feeling of you don't have the capability. I think acknowledging these feelings are normal for everybody, whether we are for even first people whose English is their mother tongue, they have difficulties with writing. So I think we need to acknowledge these feelings and learn how to overcome it instead of just giving up. So the research process starts with, for sure, with generating ideas, start with identifying the research questions, and then you start to design your study, implement, analyze, and disseminate your finding to applied research that will feed the evidence-based medicine practice and future research generation. So why do we do research? Or not research, sorry. Why do we need to have a research proposal handy always before starting any research project? For many reasons, but the most important three, and I'll start with the first one, which is very important, simply because a research proposal is like a blueprint. And imagine if you are planning to design a house or a building without spending a lot of time in designing, a lot of time in engaging expertise, in formulating a team. What could happen is this house can collapse, and the same thing exactly can happen with research. If you don't give it the time and you just go and rush and be excited and you just go and collect data without a solid and based, without good readiness and preparedness, without formulating research team, without looking at the all part of protocol, research proposal protocol in depth, all these efforts at the end will be useless, and you will feel frustrated because you might feel that you missed an important step or part of research, you missed an important data to collect, and it's too late, and you will regret it. So it's very important to have a research proposal for this reason. And the second reason, I think, is for IRB approval. This is very important. As long as your research is involving human subjects, you need to have research protocol or proposal to get IRB approval. And lastly, for fund. If you're applying for fund, for sure, you need to have a good research proposal. Okay, research proposal, as we said, we'll start with a research question. And this is a nice acronym to tell us what are the criteria for a good research proposal. So F here stands for feasibility. Your research needs to be feasible. Sometimes we have a brilliant idea, but if the idea is not practical, I cannot apply it on ground, I think it's useless. So it should be feasible. Feasibility in terms of the subjects. Do you have enough patients, enough subjects, individuals? Do you have affordable? Do you have enough money? Do you have fund? Do you have enough time? And then manageable in scope. And are you experts in this field? This is very important. You can't conduct research without good expertise, unless you're doing research in something very new and everybody does not have the knowledge, and you're trying to do it, like epidemics and like currently COVID-19. I think I encourage everybody, even if it's not their field, if they're interested to start, because what we need in COVID research is basic epidemiological data, descriptive data. The research should be interesting, first of all, to you, so you can excel on it, and to your colleagues, and to the community in your field. And then it should be novel. Novelty does not necessarily mean novel means innovative, never done before. Novelty means it's going to add to you, never done, at least in your community. I'll tell you, epidemiological data about hypertension in the kingdom is novel because no one had done it globally. So there are simple things that you think it's not novel, but in the context, if you put it in the context, it is novel. Ethical, of course, otherwise our IRB colleagues, they will not approve it. It should be relevant to the scientific knowledge, to the clinical health policy and future research. All right, so I have the ideas, and I'm in a research group. I formulated my research group, and we have difference. Everyone in the group has a research question. So, and this is a practical approach. How do we prioritize our research questions? So I think the best way is to do the nominal group technique, or the NGT, in which you can bring all the at least pick up 5 and then score them based on the criteria that we have mentioned, and then come up with conclusion. Every individual will have a score, and then sit together, and if there is any argument, try to solve it and make up your decision in priority, which is research study you need to prioritize. You decide about your study. Now you know what you want to talk about. You should do this practice, which is a critical thinking decision path. Ask yourself, assess what is the primary purpose of your study. And I'll give you an example to make it easy. So let's say nephrotic syndrome. I'm a nephrologist, so I'll talk about all my examples are about nephrology. So nephrotic syndrome basically is the disease where kids spills protein, they get puffy, and the gold standard treatment for them is steroids. So I'm a researcher, and I say, and my theory is, why not to use tacrolimus as a first line, because steroid has a lot of side effects. So I want to prove, my hypothesis is that tacrolimus is as good as steroids in treating nephrotic syndrome. So I have to ask myself, is the question that I just stated descriptive? Am I describing? Am I interested in just describing, exploring? Or am I testing something? I want to compare. If the answer is no, is yes, I'll just go to formulate, and there's no need for hypothesis generation. And what applies to my question is no, I want to compare. So I need to go with conventional type of studies that can test hypothesis. So qualitative or descriptive studies are studies that are made just to generate hypothesis, while interventional, observational trials, especially prospective trials, are studies for testing hypothesis. And then you need to ask yourself, what type of hypothesis? Is it one direction or bi-direction? So in my example, I said, I want to see if tacrolimus is as good as steroids. So this is bi-directional, because it might be better or worse. When I say directional hypothesis, that means, no, I want to confirm that my tacrolimus is better or tacrolimus is worse. So this is very important before you start, so you can know which type of study you need to talk about. And Dr. Hadil is with us today. She's the moderator. Inshallah, on Monday, she will talk in depth about the observation studies. Okay, so a typical research proposal has the following formats. First, it should have title, introduction, literature review, methodology, section, ethics, timeline and work plan, budget, and references. And let's start, I'll talk about each one in details. Sorry. So a typical research proposal, as we said, should has title. So how to choose a good title. And here I'll just give you quick examples about title. Benefits of meditation for the nursing profession, quantitative investigations. In this, they want to look at what are the benefits of meditation in nursing group. And these are the proposed research questions. So the first one looks good, it's not bad. Why mindful nurses make the best communicators? It seems like a title in a research book rather than a research question. Meditation is glorious. Nurses on the move, quantitative report on how meditation can improve research performance. And I think if you look, and based on on the criteria we've mentioned, how the research question should predict the content, should be interesting, and should reflect tone. I think the last research question is the best, which is nurses as a whole, a quantitative report on how meditation can improve nurse. It's catchy, the scope is very clear, and even the methods used are very clear. So tips on choosing, quick tips, your title should predict the scope of the study. It should not exceed 15 words. Avoid lengthy titles. Avoid using abbreviation and jargons in your title. Should be catchy and interesting. And always, this is my way, and I feel it's a good idea to keep the title until the end. For sure, for the proposal, you need to have a title, but the title you're giving a proposal should not be the same title in your manuscript. And it's a good idea to ask your research team about, don't take decision alone, always ask your research team what do you think is the best title and leave it until the end because the content might change, so the title should reflect the result in the content. Okay, let's go to the introduction part. I believe it's the most difficult part, and the reason is it's the basics of your research proposal. And the way we approach it is like the inverse pyramid. In your introduction, start broad. Talk about the background of your problem. In my case, nephrotic syndrome. I'll talk about what is nephrotic syndrome. I'll talk about prevalence. I'll talk about risk factors. So start broad, and then try to narrow down. And then I'll talk about what are the gold standard treatments, why they are using this treatment, what is the evidence base for this treatment, and then start to, and this is based on, of course, on literature review, and then look at where are the gap in knowledge. Why our research is important. All right, so this is the introduction. I'll talk about, and then at the end section of the introduction, you need to clearly set your aims, objectives, and if you have any hypotheses. And let's start with the problem statement. Always you need to ask yourself, why was this problem identified? How bad is the problem? Who is affected? Where is the problem? How would your research help in solving this problem? And again, it's the inverse. Second thing is you need to analyze this problem. Sorry, this looks busy diagram, but I think this is very important to analyze the problem. So the problem is, let's say, in this, I took it from a handbook in medical research, and their problem, they were looking at screening program for G6PD. And they found that the program is not efficient and there's a problem. So they asked themselves questions. So the main problem is there's inefficient procedure in the program, yet they don't know where is it. So the best way to analyze your problem is to use what we call the bubble diagram, or what is used usually in analysis, we call it the fishbone graph or analysis. Put your main problem in the middle, and then start to ask yourself, what is the problem? What are the contributing factors to this problem? What are the primary contributing factors? How they are related? And then get bigger and bigger. If I have the primary factor, what are the secondary, tertiary? That does not necessarily mean that you're going to research all this, but the depth of knowledge, knowing the entire picture, will help you in formulating your research proposal and writing your manuscript in a very efficient way. And let's say here, they found, and let's focus on these three problems. There was inadequate documentation, there's inefficient laboratory services, and there is inefficient specimen collection. And then you can choose focus on only one. Let's focus on this and look at all the contributing factors and causing and analyze. And from here, you can decide about what variables you want, what is the scope, and you can refine your research objective. So be very explicit about analyzing your problem. A typical research proposal also have to have literature review. And I put it separately, although literature review is always part of introduction, because I want to stress on the importance of literature review. So in literature review, as you know, maybe going in details is out of the scope of my presentation today and for the sake of time, but you just go and search. The main concept, or what is literature review, is the critical recap of what has been already researched on. Look at relevant literature. You can find it in certain engines, research engines like Google Scholar, Medline, EBSCO, Ovid, Scopus, Cochrane Library, and these are just an example of another research engines in their website. It's easy to find. You need to learn, or at least take courses, or ask for help from librarian or take online courses, YouTube's, videos to help you how to research and how to use the typical research terms or MISH terms in order to get all what you want. And it's very important also to search for open sources and to search for unpublished also data and resources. Second thing, you have to evaluate the selected sources you have chosen. And evaluation here means critical appraisal. You need to critically appraise each article, and then you need to identify the landmarks article, because the landmark articles in any field has the background knowledge for this field. So you need to know it, and then you need at this stage, you need to take notes. And always at this stage, when you do the search, it's better to start saving your search and references in a reference manager. You can use EndNote, and you can use another reference manager, which is Mendeley. I do advise everybody to use it. It's a very user-friendly. It's free, and you can get education and orientation. Free YouTube channels to tell you. It's very easy. You can share files. You can have files according to their research topics, and also it can send you emails. Depends on the area of your interest to update you. So I think it's a really good one. The third, which is the most important part in introduction and literature review, try to identify weaknesses in literature, the debates, the areas of gaps in knowledge and the contradiction. And you need to use your critical skills, ability, and critical thinking in setting an argument for your study, for your research project, based on what are the deficiencies in literature. So how different is your research from? And I'll give you an example. In nephrotic syndrome, the gold standard treatment is steroids. When you go back and look at what is the background of using, and it's not just steroid, 60 milligram per second. If you go back, you will not find a good evidence of choosing this number or choosing this dose. The choice is arbitrary. And no one, if you ask in the field of pediatric nephrology, why 60 milligram, why not 40 milligram, will give you an answer. So this is a big caveat. This is a big debate. This is a big area of contradiction. I would argue as a physician and pediatrician that high dose of steroid has a lot of side effects. It can cause growth retardations, hypertension, a lot of problem. Why not to use 40 milligrams? So by finding the gap in knowledge, by setting a good argument that these doses high and I have alternative and I want to test it, this is the way you write your proposal and you write your argument, by looking at what are the deficiencies. In English, again, English is not our first language, and I think writing is very, very challenging for us. And the scholar writing or scientific writing is completely different than our linguistic. It's different language. So always it's not bad, and I do this, especially when I want to argue. I use some discussion area of disagreement, and I use some, sorry, it might be busy slide, but you can use these discussion area of disagreement and words and phrases that can help you. For example, on the other hand, on one hand, blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, one persistent debate is, and is whether, what are the phrases that you can use to strengthen your argument? Some would argue that using steroids, other content that, these things, and when you have acknowledging widely held assumptions, according to the conventional wisdom, many people assume that. So these are phrases. I encourage everybody to practice it and learn it, because it's going to make your argument very valid and scientific. All right, so let's go to the methodology section. In the methodology section, we need to start with the study type and design. And I'm not going to talk about it because Hadil, inshallah, is going to talk about it on Monday. And then we need to talk about the source of data collection. And maybe here's the same framework that I talked about earlier about how to decide which type of study you use, whether descriptive or whether interventional. The second important thing is the source. In methodology, you need to be very, very explicit. Write as the reader does not know anything. And this is not just for the reader, for yourself. When you go back and do your research, you will find yourself very systematic, and you will find yourself very clear, and everything is documented. So be very explicit. Don't imply things. Don't think things, oh, this is intuitive, people will understand. No, be very explicit. So ask yourself, what are in the methodology you should have source of data collection, clearly mentioned for where you're gonna get your data. So let's say in this research, this is retrospective research where we are collecting data from database, or we are collecting data from registry, medical records, interviews, reports, observations. So clearly say what is the source of your data collection. Second, identify your variables. What are the variables you need to collect? Very important. Define your variable. The definition could be conceptual or operational. Conceptual definition is the conceived definition that we know. Let's say obesity. Obesity means someone is overweight. This is conceptual definition. Operational, no. I'll include all obese children with body mass index more than this, their weight in kilos, their height in centimeters, using early morning weight with this scale. So this is operational. And the reason is, when this study needs to be repeated, or someone wants to critique it, they need to know exactly what methods have you used. How did you define your variables? So be very explicit. And then the scale of your measurements, the scale of variables. We know that we have different type of variables, and I know that Dr. Abdul Salam has discussed it nicely and in depth in his descriptive lecture, and everybody can refer to. So categorical is nominal or ordinal or numeric variable. This is very important when you write your statistical analysis section, and you need to know what are the variables. And here are simple examples, just for the sake of time, variables. Very important slide, when you define your variable, very important to know which variable is the cause and what is the effect. What is the risk factor variable and what is the outcome variable. And knowing those variables and defining them like independent and dependent are very important language in research. And the reason is when you write your statistical section, all statistical tests talks about variables is it the independent variable or the dependent? For example, if your dependent variable is categorical and your independent variable are categorical or continuous algo, you can use logistic regression. So knowing the type of variables will help you to know which test you need to use. All right, and here is an example, and there's also important concept in variables are compounding factors. And I mentioned here compounding factors because they are very important factors that you need to consider in your research, and you need to identify these variables early on, because either the compounding factors should be identified in the phase of research proposal and writing, or you can account for them in the analysis. And I always prefer account for them in the research in the research proposal. So the compounding factor is a factor that is associated with the cause and it's associated with the outcome, but is not in the direct pathway, causal pathway. And I'll give you an example. Children with or infant born with low gestational birth, and we think that smoking, if the mother was smoking during pregnancy, is the cause. There is another variable, which is the income and socioeconomic status of the mother and nutrition that can affect both smoking and birth weight, but it's not indirect, it's not in the causal relationship pathway. All right, and then we will go to sampling, and sampling actually is also a very important concept in your research proposal. And the reason is, when we do research, our goal is to find a representative sample. Of course, we can't research the entire population. And when we take a sample, we need a representative sample. So the way we define sample taking can define or can affect our results. If I don't take, I don't plan for a good sample, I can end up with a sample that does not represent the reality, that does not represent the population. And I can't infer outcome, or I can't infer or relay the result to the reality. In fact, it can be deceiving. And the second thing, all what we want is a sample that represents a sample that represents reality. So this is the population. I need to have a sample that represents reality. If I do have this sample, the outcome of that I get, I can generalize it. I can make inferential statistic, and I can estimate the event and result. So sample can be random, and there are different example of samples. The best sample is random sample. And of course, randomization is a very important concept in research, just to make sure and ensure that both research groups are similar in everything except the thing or the subject of interest. If I want to test a medication in two groups, those two groups should be equal in the baseline characteristics, in demographics, in the risk factors, and the only difference is one will get tacrolimus, the other group will not get tacrolimus. By doing this, I can make sure that my results are robust and I can come up with conclusion. However, sometimes taking a random sample is not practical. It's not applicable. And you always need to balance whether I have the sample versus do I have, I don't have enough. Well, let's say in transplant, pediatric transplant, I think it's a very, very specialized area. And we don't have a lot of patients with pediatric transplant. And in order to do research, either to collaborate and do big randomized clinical trials with collaboration, or you need to choose a convenient sample, or whatever you have, study your pediatric kidney transplant population in your hospital, and then based on it, as long as you know that this will subject your study to biases, as you know what are the biases that, and you try to account for it. If you can't, you can just acknowledge these biases at the end. Maybe once, I think I just, let me go back to I just remember an important point in literature review. I did not talk about the limitations of studies. Very important area to identify the debates and gaps in knowledge is to look at the last part of any research paper. They will say that we have, although our study is good and strong in terms of blah, 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 however, we had these limitations. Always look at limitation and get the advantage of others' limitation in order to improve on and in order to overcome these limitations, especially if you want to reproduce the same study, but in a different way, in a stronger way. Sorry for that, just an important point. Okay, data collection tool. Data collection tool is very important to be defined from the start. You need to know exactly what tool you're going to use. And the tool you will use depends on certain criteria. Of course, I know now a lot of people are using Excel sheets to collect data. Excel sheets are not bad, but I believe there are better data collection tool that can be used because of certain advantages. And I'm here advertising for a data collection tool, which is a web-based data tool. We call it RedCap. RedCap is open source data web base that is used in more than thousands of universities, prestigious hospitals all over the world, including Harvard and a lot of institutions. And the criteria, RedCap is a really good tool. I think every hospital should, and not should, can get RedCap because it's open source. You don't pay a penny for it. And it has these criteria and qualifications. And these are the criteria that we need to have in a good data collection tool. First of all, it should be secure. Excel sheets, I don't like them because majority of the time you share it in your desktop, you send it to your research members, sometimes so they're not secure. I know you can make it secure, but RedCap or other data collection tool are secure database, and security is very important to protect the patient's privacy. And without convincing IRB people that you will collect your data in a secure place, they won't grant you with approval. So it's secure. In order to get into RedCap, you have to have login, you have to have password and username. Easy to use, and really RedCap is user-friendly. Everyone can use it. You don't need an IT background. It's a cell-based. You can customize it according to your research project. It's really fast. It's robust. There is a certain what they call it consortium where they are 24 on call. You can just email them. They can troubleshoot if you have any problem. And the most important thing here is the quality of data. So in RedCap, there is inbuilt validity instrument, or where it can automatically tell you that if you enter data that's out of range or a number that does not make sense, it won't allow you, and it will alarm you. And it's built in the RedCap. So you, by doing this, you know that you are having a good quality data, validated data, reliable data. And the way of entering data in RedCap is really systematic and depends on your research idea, much way better than Excel sheet. And it's very flexible. Nice, and data entry is nice and easy. And what makes it unique, you can access it from anywhere, from your iPhone. There is an app for RedCap in your iPhone. And the good thing about it also, you can share your, you can do one project in 100 universities, all over the place. All of them real life data entry. So it's good for group research project and collaborative work. And the good thing also about that, the data export, what is painful in data collection in Excel sheet, that you have to code it. Meaning, let's say, gender, I have female, male. So female is coded 1 and male coded 2 or 0, 1. So when you enter your data in RedCap, it will be coded automatically. And then you can export data dictionary sheet with the code. So this makes your life very easy. And then you can export it to all statistical software, to SPSS, to SAS, I believe to R also. So it is really unique and secure. So these are the most important things that you need to have in your data collection. Data collection should be very systematic, safe, easy, secure. Okay, what about, again, still we are in methodology section, statistical analysis plan. I think this is one of the most difficult, I would say difficult, if you don't have a statistical background. And you don't need to be a biostatistician to write this part, but at least you have to have the basics of analysis. But I would encourage everybody, if you do have biostatistician, this is the time to include biostatistician with you early on. The best time to include biostatistician while you are writing the research proposal, not at the end. And I'll tell you why. If you did not include him in the beginning and you start data collection, at the end, when you give him the data, he will tell you, what is your research question? I want to examine blah, blah, blah. But he will tell you, you haven't collected this, or the way you collected your data is not appropriate. You collected this as a categorical variable, while the best approach to answer your research question is to collect age as a continuous variable. So these tricks are important. If you don't have statistical background, I do advise you and encourage you to enroll biostatistician from the beginning, from the start. In this section, basically what you need to do is to describe, if you have descriptive data, how you're going to describe it. Usually descriptive data are prescribed as proportions, frequencies, and you should clearly mention it in the statistical part. And I feel that statistical part is, in majority of the time, deficient in most of the proposal. I'm IRB member in our hospital, so I do see these deficiencies a lot. So statistical parts, usually they just write part of methodology without going in depth. And I think they need to go in depth. All descriptive variables should be explained, how we will use it. quantitative data, you need clearly to say, and I'll give you example, for example, if you wanted to compare between two means of categorical variable, you can use independent sample t-test, or what is equivalent if it's not parametric. So this is the way to describe each variable. At least the variables of your primary objectives and secondary objectives are very important to describe in the statistical analysis part. Describe how would you analyze, of course, the primary and secondary outcome based on what data you're going to use, what analysis. Sample size calculation. Very, very, very important. Sample size calculation. And again, I'm not going to go in details because Dr. Abdulsalam has talked about it, but I'll allude to mistakes that can happen if you underestimate your sample size, meaning if you chose a small sample size, you can fall in what we call type 2 error. And type 2 error is when you fail to find difference, when in reality there is a difference. And this is painful for researchers. Your results is significant, but the reason your results were not significant because your sample size was small. In another word, type 2 error is when you fail to reject your null hypothesis and null hypothesis is true. So null hypothesis states that there's no difference between whatever you're doing, no difference between tacrolimus and steroids. And this is always the default hypothesis. While my hypothesis as researcher is always the alternative hypothesis. I want to prove there is a difference, whether this difference is better, tacrolimus is better than steroid, is worse, or is as good as steroid. On the other hand, you might also commit type 1 error when you overinflate samples. Can you imagine if you choose a very big sample size, you can commit type 1 error? And type 1 error is when you fail to reject the null and your null is true, meaning when you find difference in your study and in reality there is no difference. The difference is just the estimate effect is overestimated because you chose big size. If you chose 10,000 people to address a certain point, this number is big, you are committing type 1 error. Power calculation is the same. You can commit type beta error, which is type 2 error, if your study is not powered enough. And very important thing, the smaller the magnitude of difference you want to study, the bigger sample size you need. All right, and it's easy to commit type 2 error. Level of significance, of course, it's arbitrary. Always we use one-sided level or two-sided, p-value less than 0.05. And I would love to discuss p-value, but I don't think I have time now. Ethics, and again, in ethics, there are certain things, and it's very important to talk about in ethics. If you are involving, you will need ethical approval whenever you have a subject, human subject, whether you're doing retrospective study, whether you are doing data collection, you need approval from. But usually when you have a retrospective study, all what the ethic people want is to give them a statement that can make sure that the individuals will not get harmed. If it's only database collection, make sure, give them a statement that saying that we are going to collect de-identified data. No one will know about the identity of persons. This is very important when you write statement about your data management. That, for example, human subject medical records numbers will be kept on a password protective database. Here I used RedCap, and it will be linked only with a study identification number. It will not be linked to persons, meaning if I go retrospectively, still I can't identify that person. If you are involving vulnerable group, like children, for example, where they can't give and you need a consent for the research, and you can't give, they can't consent, you need to provide that, I'll take assent, for example, or you need to provide statement of waiver of consent if you think that you want to waive, and there are conditions for waiver, and it's all in the ethical part. But in your research proposal, you need to have ethics statement, whether in the way you will collect the data, or if you need a consent, and you need to be explicit because the IRB people really focus on these. And also you can talk about in the statement, for the sake of privacy of research parts, all personal identifier, name, medical records, so it's the same thing. Always state this when we are doing retrospective or even prospective. how can you maintain the privacy of your people? And then ethics, timeline, very important. So line out timeline for yourself and for the IRB, time frame for data entry, for 2 months for data entry, 2 months for analysis, 1 month for writing the draft, and finally I will submit and edit. Before I end, I'll just want to mention some common mistakes in writing research proposal. Not giving the appropriate context to develop the research question. Not citing important studies. This is a very big problem. Not staying on track of the research question. And this is really frequent and difficult sometimes to keep track and not to deviate, especially when you have secondary information, secondary results, interesting results. Don't report on them and deviate from your primary aims and objectives. And it's easy, it can happen easily. So keep focus, keep the same track. Not performing comprehensive and compelling argument for the proposed research. And this is very valid in order to convince people. And beating about Boston and emphasizing on minor concerns, as I mentioned, and not maintaining a strong sense of direction. And this is just recap for how proposal, introduction, objectives, methodology, and then actual study data collection, entry, recommendations at the end, and coming up with the proposal and writing. And this is the end. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Al-Anoud. The floor is open now for questions from the attendees. We had actually earlier one question about critical appraisal of articles of studies, and I believe that we're working on a module.
Yeah, actually, it's exactly so. This is out of the scope of today's
right.
But we believe our organizing committee are working on evidence-based medicine course where we can, and I love this area, so we can talk in details about critical appraisal. And I believe this is a very, very important skill to earn and to have for all healthcare workers.
Dr. Al-Anoud, I think you have two questions. One of them is about REDCap. One of the attendees is asking, is REDCap, is it an individual registration?
No, actually it's institutional acquisition for this database. So you can ask your institution for, I'm working in King Fahd Specialist Hospital, Dammam. So we got the REDCap in 2015. It is very simple. You just ask for approval from REDCap is a website generated by the Vanderbilt University. You just email the research group there and they will give you access, grant you access. They will grant you teaching modules. They have technical support 24-hour. So it's free, and I do encourage all hospitals or institutions to get this access. For REDCap, it's open source software.
Okay.
User friendly.
A second question is, what do you mean by limitation? You spoke about it earlier.
Yeah, so in each study, usually at the end, before conclusion, and this is very important part of a good study. If I don't find the researchers or the author of study critiquing themselves, at the end, I start doubting and questioning, because usually there is no perfectionism. You can't be 100% right in doing. There must be limitations. Limitations saying, for example, our study is retrospective in nature. We were not able to study those patients prospectively. We know the prospective approach is better than the retrospective approach. So this is important limitations. So when you want to replicate or do the same topic, do it retrospectively. So this is what I mean by limitations. Limitations are the deficiencies acknowledged by the author or the deficiencies that you have come with by critiquing the articles. And you feel if this study was done differently, if this part was, this variable was measured differently, the result would be better, or the study would have been better. So this is what I mean by limitations.
Okay. Another question is, what are the information that you get from each literature review for each study? ما هي المعلومات التي نأخذها بالضبط من كل literature review في الدراسة؟
طيب أول شيء you need to go يعني thoroughly, systematically, looking at the research question, looking at the study design of the research, look at their objectives, their aim, how did they conduct the study? Did they had holistic approach in conducting this study? Was it systematic? Did they adjust and look for all confounders? What are the gap in knowledge? Did they fulfill all the gap in knowledge? And of course, in order to critique these studies, you can't critique when your knowledge about the topic is shallow. In order to be objective and critique, you need to have a depth knowledge, and you need to have the skills of critical thinking and critical appraisal. So these are the things that you need to look for the study. And the most important thing, how to set an argument for your research based on weaknesses and gaps in the previous study. So you need to be very interested in the topic in order to know how to argue and know how to find the deficiencies.
Okay. إذا نتيجة البحث لم تدعم الفرضية، ممكن أحول الفرضية للفرضية الصفرية. I guess the null hypothesis.
أبداً. This is a major mistake. You mean if you came up, I'm not sure if I understand the question right. So if you mean that your study result is negative and it was not with your supporting your alternative hypothesis, this is not bad. This is good. I need to know about negative studies. And there's people think that unfortunately, this is driven by journals. They always encourage people to publish positive studies, and this is a big mistake. Knowing about tacrolimus was not better than steroids, it's a very important finding, and it's a negative study. And you should not play with your hypothesis, because this is going to affect the entire study. Null hypothesis is always the default, except in one setting, when you are doing inferiority trial. When you are doing non-inferiority trial, your alternative is the null, and the null is the alternative. But the default and the mindset of researcher when reading or critically appraising article is the null. Null, there's no difference. And I'll continue to be skeptical until I'm convinced, until the last sentence in the statistical analysis, and then I'll say, okay, I have evidence to reject. And by the way, we do reject the null, but for reasons in statistics, you can't say I accept the alternative. Although you would think intuitively, when you reject your null, you're accepting the alternative, but this is, from a statistical point of view, it's a mistake.
Okay, thank you, Doctora. There's a few other questions. One of them is, could you just talk briefly about the causations and associations in research? That's a big topic.
That's a big topic in itself, but yeah, it's a really good question. Association never means causal relationship. Always, if association does not always infer causality. And causality actually has to have criteria, well-set criteria. Example, it should be the study is reproducible. There is a size effect. For example, if I increase the dose of tacrolimus, I'll see more response. So always there is dose response. There are certain criteria for causality. So this is one thing. The other thing is the type of your study. As I mentioned in the diagram there, you can't infer causality based on epidemiological data, demographics, and this is clear in COVID studies now. A lot of studies are just descriptive and demographic data. They found that the disease is it's affecting men or male more than female, and they say, oh, that means that COVID is risky. Being a male is more, you will be more risk to develop COVID, or you risk of mortality. You can't infer this relationship. All what you can do is you find association. And these type of studies, cross-sectional case series, what you can get is to generate hypotheses. So what I'll say, oh, gender might be associated with, it is associated with mortality, let's say, or smoking, it is associated with mortality based on numbers. However, we need to do prospective data, prospective cohort to infer causal relationship. Causal relationship can be inferred in RCTs, in prospective, sometimes in retrospective studies if it's done systematically. So association never infer causation, completely different.
Okay. Could you explain briefly how to calculate sample size?
All right, sample size calculation is much simple now. It has statistics base. Before you can use the old, if you want, from statistic point of view, you can use the Z-scores and certain calculation where you can exactly calculate, but now there are softwares. Softwares, you plug what you want. But the most important component of a sample size is to know what is the expected difference between, and usually sample size in RCTs. And let's go back to my example. I want to see if tacrolimus is better than steroids. So has this research done before? So you need to go back to the research that has been done before and look at the expected difference between the two groups. Let's say the expected difference in terms of response. Let's say there is a 20% difference. So this 20% difference needs a piece of information that's very important to plug in the software for sample size calculation, and immediately it can calculate it for you. It also depends on power, of course, the 80%, if you want to set your power to 80%, and it will depend on your beta error. Beta error, which is type 2 error, which is, as I said, the failure to reject the null when the null is true. Sorry, it's is it type 2 error, failure to reject? Yes, failure to reject the null when the null is true.
Okay, one question is about
rejecting the null when the null is not true. Okay.
So one question is about the ethics consideration in retrospective that is from a database, either national or international.
Yeah. Do we need ethical approval, you mean?
I guess ethics consideration in retrospective. I guess he's asking if you do need an IRB approval for retrospective study from a database, national or international.
We do have. Do we need any research that involve human subjects require mandate research approval, ethical approval, all type. There are certain, but the way IRB look at the research approval depends on the risk. So if your study is not exerting more than minimal risk, and minimal risk meaning the risk that you can encounter in your daily practice, then they can expedite or exempt, even not expedite. So depending on the level of risk, usually retrospective studies are exempt because it's data collection. You are not dealing with, you are not exerting any harm. You're not taking samples, biological samples. You are not giving medications. You are not interfering. There's no intervention. So it depends. If it's retrospective data collection, you need to have IRB approval, but it's going to be expedited or exempt. If it's clinical trial, for sure, it's going to need full board IRB.
There's a question, why eventually presenting your research end up much more effective and seems more important than writing a very good proposal?
Presenting your research is more effective than writing oral presentation, you mean?
Presenting your research, yeah, presenting end up much more effective and more important than writing a very good proposal. I guess maybe what he means presenting it like as an abstract or
I think the research proposal is the blueprint. And in order to reach this stage of presenting it as an abstract or in conferences, you need to your proposal need to be written and should stand on a solid ground. So right. I don't think you can present anything without a good research proposal. So research proposal is very important, both presenting it and writing it.
Okay. We have one question. Do you think that the research proposal format in King Fahd Specialist Hospital is a comprehensive one?
Absolutely. No, I'm serious. No, I think it's very comprehensive. And whenever I use it, I feel it guides us because it has almost all elements. I think it has all the elements. But all what you need is to understand. You need to have a background about how to write research proposal in order to fill this format. But I think it's a good and comprehensive one.
Right. I guess our last question is, any suggestion of a title during this COVID-19 to be done?
You mean topics? I would encourage every one of you to, this is the time for research, and I think publishing research at this point of time is much, much easier than any time else. Why? Because COVID-19 is a new disease, a new infection, new virus, new epidemic. And believe me, you need to believe in yourself. And I said before, you need to be expert. But in COVID-19, you can gain expertise by reading, keeping yourself up to date. I think you will be expert by doing this because up until now, all the decisions everybody's making is based on research. It is based on evidence. We learned that the high-risk group simply from data came from China within 2 weeks of the epidemic. Their data was handy and they made decisions, and we did decisions based on evidence, based on what they have. This is the time I'm always with the practice that is dictated by evidence-based. And this is really the time to have our data in Saudi Arabia, look at what are the demographics, what are the risk factors for COVID. Alhamdulillah, we have the mortality rate in our country is way, way less than others. Part is related to the mitigation measures that we have taken early, and maybe part is related to our genetic makeup. I'm not sure. This is, again, it's a valid question to ask, and I think people are working to study whether the genetic background makes certain people more susceptible to the infection. So please gather data. I encourage, even at hospital levels, if you are COVID-19 hospital, please look at the data collection tool that is generated by the WHO and the CDC for epidemiology. Go ahead and apply it. Whenever you admit patient, just fill this data and keep it. Put it in a registry, put it in an Excel sheets, because we have patients, and it's very painful, is when you want to do research, you face a lot of obstacles, and the most important obstacles is finding data, finding comprehensive data. And I have advice, if there's time, always, even at your practice, set a standard approach of dealing with problems. And if you set it as a standard way, when you go back to study it and critique it, it's very easy to conduct research because you are conducting research on a data that was collected systematically. And it's not only for research, even when you want to go back and critique yourself, if you did not standardize the way you were dealing with your patients, you won't know what went wrong. Even if what I did was wrong, at least after a period of time, I can go back and critique myself, and I test what I have done, and I can know what is my mistake. So always standardize it. I'm with clinical practice guideline. However, clinical practice guideline is not, it's not a Quran, or you should not deviate. Always keep room for deviation, but deviation should not be the norm. Deviation should be justification. Don't be closed-minded, as I said, always be open-minded, but at least do it systematically.
I guess this was a question, and this concludes our session for
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام. صوت دكتور صقر. Hello, دكتور صقر.
نعم. معك دكتور صقر, Chief of Research في الكلاستر. I would like actually to thank Dr. Unood and Ms. Hadil and the evening Tرووب for making this session really very informative and very successful. Thank you so much for your great efforts and for the time you spent giving this nice presentation. really it's very informative and very successful.
It is your efforts, Dr. Sagir, and I would like to thank you also for organizing these series of webinars. And for sure, without your efforts, wouldn't come true. يعطيك العافية. Thank you very much.
شكرا. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I guess this concludes our session for tonight. See you inshallah on Monday, and Dr. Al-Anoud, I think you have another lecture on Wednesday.
Inshallah, about reliability of diagnostic and screening tests, and I'll focus on tests for COVID-19 PCRs. Thank you very much, Nadeem. Thanks a lot for hosting this.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Good night, Masalam.